Sorry that they're starting to cut off the podcast after a couple minutes. Anyway, that was only 2 minutes. So they were a lot of the folks that were taken from Santa Fe, the Texans, part of this Santa Fe expedition, were American citizens, and it becomes a big story in the United States. Long story short, and it's one of the things that helps build tension between the U.S. and Mexico. Because remember, we're only about 4 years away from the United States invading Mexico. Anyway, so Mexico reacts very strongly to this incursion into their territory, and they start building up an army just south of the Rio Grande. And again, it's not that they honor the Rio Grande as a political border. It just, this is where the population centers are. You know, there's not really much between the Rio Grande and the Nueces, even today. So they start building an army in the Saltillo, Monterrey area. And let me stress again that the Rio Grande, Laredo, was not part of Texas during this period. Laredo was still part of the Mexican state of Tamaulipas. So anyway, so you have this Mexican army being gathered in what's now northern Mexico, near this disputed territory between the Rio Grande and the Nueces. And they, in 1842, the Mexican army comes in and occupies San Antonio twice. Now, these occupations are very short. They don't last a very long time. But they incense Texans. I mean, Texans are very, very angry. Now, I have to be fair a little bit. Remember, I talked about how Austin became the capital. It's kind of symbolic over how it kind of shows how Anglos now are in control of Texas. One of the reasons that San Antonio doesn't become the capital of Texas was that officials felt it was too close to Mexico, that it could be occupied very easily, which is actually what happens. So one of the advantages about Austin, and one of the reasons that that area along the Colorado River was chosen, Austin wasn't there yet. There was a very small community called Waterloo. One of the reasons that area was chosen was it was a little bit further from Mexico, a little bit further from the reach of the Mexican army. So what happens is in 1842, Mexico twice invades, occupies San Antonio very, very briefly. And then Houston, who now once again is president of Texas, he decides that he has to retaliate. So he calls this guy by the name of Alexander Somervell, and I'll try to remember to spell out this guy's name for you. And what Somervell does is he gathers a militia, a group of Texas militia in San Antonio, and it's part of a punitive expedition. What Sam Houston is going to do, he's going to punish he's going to punish the Mexican government for these invasions of Texas. Santa Anna's not involved at this point. And so what you have is about 400 or 500 Texas militia gather in San Antonio. And some of these people were freedom fighters. Some of them are Texas patriots. But to be honest with you, a lot of them were just people hoping for go in, get some loot, invade Mexico, get some loot, maybe get some land in payment for their services. But for whatever reasons, about 700 militia gather in San Antonio, and at the end of 1842, these militia head towards the Rio Grande, and they capture Laredo, and they basically sack Laredo. They go in, they don't kill a lot of people, but there's a lot of theft, and it's kind of a mess. And this guy Somervell, he looks around, and this happens in December of 1842, and he thinks, boy, this is not going well. The militia that I've gathered, they're very undisciplined. This could really go poorly. And so what Somervell does is he wants to pull the plug on this punitive expedition that Sam Houston has organized to punish Mexico for occupying San Antonio. And so he orders everybody home. He says, let's get out of here. Let's go back. Let's go back home. We've made our point to Mexico that don't fool with us. Well, most people obey this guy Somerville, but you have a couple hundred Texans, about 300, that say screw you to Somerville. We're not done yet. We're not done with punishing Mexico yet. And they continue the expedition just on their own. And so Somerville has ordered these folks home. Most people go, but about 300 decide, okay, we're not done yet. And they disobey Somerville, and they continue, and they sail down the Rio Grande towards the Gulf, and they go to and attack a town by the name of Mayer, which is just on the border, on what today is the Mexican side of the Rio Grande border. And it's a little bit confused what happens in Mayer. But long story short, it turns out to be a disaster for the Texans. The Texans, these 300 men, they're not well organized. They're not well led. They don't have a lot of supplies. The Mexican army is fighting on its home territory, on its home turf, so to speak. And the Mexican army figures out that these Texans don't have any resources. And around Christmas time, a little bit after Christmas time, as we go from 1842 into 1843, the so-called, the remnants of the Somerville expedition, these folks that had disobeyed him and had attacked the Mexican town of Mayer, surrender to Mexican authorities. And the reason they surrender is that they just don't have any supplies. And so the Mexican army has the upper hand. So what becomes the Mayer expedition, this group of insurgents that refuse to obey Somerville and refuse to call off the punishment of Mexico, what happens to these folks is they end up surrendering to the Mexican army. And then you have a very, very famous incident in Texas history. These folks are marched towards Matamoros, and there's a big escape. And many of them escape control over Mexican authorities, and they're very, very quickly recaptured. The people of northern Mexico, or people south of the Rio Grande, they don't like them at all. It's a very tough country there. So these folks that escape the Mexican army are very, very quickly captured, and now we have Santa Anna reappearing again. So ultimately, there are about 190 or so Texans, and that have been recaptured after this, jailbreak. And Santa Anna says, "Okay, I want them all executed." It's kind of a replay of Goliad, or a replay of the Alamo in a sense. But the governor of Coahuila doesn't want all that much blood on his hands. So what he does is he orders every 10th Texan executed. And the way they choose is that these men are forced to put their hand in a jar and pick beans. And in the jar, there were, for every 10th man, there were there were black beans. White beans meant that you would not be shot, but if you picked a black bean, then you'd be executed. So the Mexican army ends up executing, I don't know, something like 20 men. The leader of the break was also executed as well, although he didn't choose a black bean. So this is a famous black bean episode in Texas history. These men are executed. The rest are allowed they're marched on their way, and eventually most of them do go free. But here's the point I want to make. Twice, when the Texans went into Santa Fe first, and then this rump group after the Somerville expedition that had attacked Mayer, Mexico, twice Texans were defeated by Mexicans. And the Mexicans, they may not have been able to recapture Texas north of Nueces, but they proved, the Mexican government and the Mexican army proved plenty competent to protect Mexico from these invasions from the north.